There's an old adage that if you got yourself in a hot mess, the first thing you need to do is to stop doing what you've been doing. Stop the insanity. It's time to make some changes. Changes of attitude, behavior, and probably the strategies you're using to build your business. That is why I've called on the change agent maestro himself, Mr. Jeff Hazlett. Jeff is the former CMO of Kodak, a serial entrepreneur, and a best-selling author. Jeff has a new book out called Running the Gauntlet, Essential Business Lessons to Lead, Drive Change, and Grow Profits. The best way to sum up Jeff and his new book and our objective for this interview is to read the endorsement that I gave for Jeff on his book. Quote, "It's time someone grab you and your business by the shirt collar and shake you. Strap on your chaps. Cowboy CMO Jeff Hazlett is going to take you on a rough and tumble ride that just might change the life of your business forever." Jeff, welcome to Success. Let's do some shirt collar shaking here today.
Yeehaw! Saddle up and ride, baby. That's an adage that we have in South Dakota where I'm from, although I'm living in New York, but you summed it up best. That's what people have to do to drive success is make it happen and get on that horse and ride.
So Jeff, who are you? I mean, tell us why you're qualified to be our knight in shining armor to help us finally change. How did you get here?
You know, my last gig was as Chief Marketing Officer of Eastman Kodak, one of the most iconic brands in the world. But I'm really, as you said earlier, a serial entrepreneur. I know what it's like to start up a business and get 2 file cabinets, go out to Home Depot, buy a door, set it on top, and that's my desk. So I know what it's like to start a business. And if you haven't laid it, awake at night, wondering whether you're going to make payroll the next day, you haven't really lived. And I've been in those days as well. I'm a marketer and always have been, but I'm a guy who tells it straight. So I can do a little bit of the BS, but I'm always about delivering on the promises that you have to drive. And that's what, we learn in South Dakota. That's what we learn. And that's what I try to tell in my book, Running the Gauntlet, and my first book, which was The Mirror Test, about looking in the mirror and you're asking yourself the hard questions that any business owner has to ask.
So let's keep it that no BS zone here. And the beginning of your book starts out with a great story about a clock. I think it sums up nicely everything we want to talk about here today. So start us off with sharing that little story.
Well, I like simple things, and this is a great example about driving change in an organization and running the gauntlet, whether you're in a small business on Main Street or a big business on Wall Street. I'm sitting in a meeting with a bunch of my team members at Kodak, and the clock was off. It was off by about 15 minutes. Somehow during the time period of the maintenance of the building, it had, fallen behind. And every time we walked into that room, my new staff at the time would sit there and tell me they would complain about that clock being off. And finally, I just challenged and said, well, what are you going to do about it? And finally, a young woman got up grabbed a chair, took off her high heels, put the chair underneath the clock, climbed up on the chair, and changed it. And that's what it takes to be a leader. That's what it takes to be an agent of change. Someone who says, I'm going to move past the first 3 seconds of fear. I'm willing to be a beginner. I'm willing to take a risk and jump up on the chair and change it. And it's just something as simple as that gets the team moving to prove that why are you sitting around complaining about it? Get in there and change it. Who do you think's coming to your aid? There is no, knight in shining armor. There is no cowboy riding up. You've got to do it yourself. And that's what that clock example was all about.
So why, Jeff, do you think it takes people so long to notice the need for change? What's blocking our view, per se?
I think everybody gets in a rut, and I think that's a big part of it. We keep doing things the same way because that's the way we've been told to do them. And I don't think, people inside of companies where things are going down wake up every morning and says, I can't wait to be stupid. I think what happens is we just kind of get numb to it for a while, and we start going along playing the same old game until it takes someone with some fresh eyes sometimes. Someone says, look, I've had enough. We're not getting to where we want to go, and we've got to change it, and says, I'm going to put a stake in the ground. And that's what it takes to be an agent of change. Someone who's going to put a stake in the ground and said, we're stopping right here, and we're not pulling the stake out until we move forward. And it's at first, as I said earlier, the first 3 seconds of fear, because whenever someone takes, and especially in a big company, or up against the owner and says, we need to do something different, or no, that's not right, there's a couple seconds of fear, just like if you're going to go bungee jumping or jumping up a high dive. And they've really got to move past it. But once they move past it, it's exhilarating and you can get it done. And that's what everyone needs to be doing in the company, is looking at things as continual change, continual improvement, and driving to make it happen.
So speaking of exhilaration, you describe change in businesses being similar to running a gauntlet. That sounds so much fun. So tell us why.
Well, I tell people it's like, when you go into a business, like I was at Kodak, or many of you have been at other companies where you've been brought in to help drive some change, or you've taken over the business, or you're trying to get all your employees to move along. I tell people it's like being captured by the Shoshone Indians in 1820, and you're a fur trapper, and they drag you into the village, and all of the people start surrounding you, and they make up two lines, and everybody takes a stick, a stone, a knife, or, a tree limb, and they strip you down naked and basically tell you you're going to run this gauntlet, and when you're done, they're going to turn you free if you can make it through the gauntlet. Well, that's what it's like driving change in a company. You have all these people along the way who think they can stab you, hit you, beat you, try to stop you. They think that they have an opinion to be able to do that. They have a right to say those things, and typically they don't. So it's like running the gauntlet, and you're going to have to do that every single day. And as an agent of change in a business, whether you're the owner or a leader or, anyone even way down at the lowest levels of the company, you can be an agent of change, but you've got to be willing to take the punishment, because they are going to give it to you. They're going to line up, and there will be all these obstructionists and naysayers who will line up against you to try to slow you down or stop you. And you've really got to push through that and take the pain. And by the way, when you get done running the gauntlet, what they're going to do is jump on horses and chase you down again. It never stops, and that's one of the key things that most people who have been in this role as an agent of change know. It just never stops. It keeps coming, and baby, that's the game, and that's what makes it fun.
That sounds like fun. So speaking of pain and punishment, Jeffrey, when it comes to business, you note that there's one thing that is most dangerous. What is that?
For me and for most businesses, I think it's mood. Darren, it's all about driving success in a business. And you can be a very successful company and start to have a bad move, and everything goes down the toilet. Everything starts going downhill. And you could have the greatest products in the world and some of the greatest service, but if people have a bad mood in the business, if they believe that their best days are behind them and not in front of them, it kills the business. And I've seen it time and time again, and I'm sure you have as well, Darren, where people really truly believe that their best days are behind them. And you've really got to change the mood in the company in order to get the agents of change moving, in order to get an innovative company and get to where you want to be with the success metrics that you have for the company. So changing the mood, I tell everyone, start with the mood, because if you have great mood, you can do anything. You can have a bad product and have a great mood and still be very successful because you got a great mood. Mood can overcome a lot of bad habits.
So give us another one. That was such great advice. Give us another dangerous trap.
Well, another great one that I point out in the book, Running the Gauntlet, is about not moving. I mean, just standing there. At least do something. And moving forward is the best thing. I tell people a lot of times, ready, fire, aim, And so sometimes you just want to get going and get going in the right direction, because what happens if you make a mistake, Darren? For most of us in business today, what's going to happen? No one's going to die. I mean, I'm in marketing for the most part, so if I make a big mistake, no one's going to die. So it's about moving your business forward. So do something, no matter what it is. Give it a shot, because no one's going to die.
So what factors then, Jeffrey, generally keep a business from making a move? Why don't people wake up and change the clock?
Well, I think it's that fear factor that I talked about before. I think we're always afraid to try things new. We're always afraid for who might make the first big mistake and be pointed out for it. When I first started out, and everybody knows me as a cowboy and having a place out in South Dakota, and I love horses, love to ride, love to check my fences, love to do the things in a more traditional way. But before I learned to ride, I had to become a beginner. I went out and bought a horse. I went out and got the trailer. I went out and got the saddle. I went out and got the boots. I looked the part, but I didn't even know how to put on a saddle. So here I was, a 38, 40-year-old guy, having to go up to a 14-year-old girl, in South Dakota, and ask her how to teach me, this big macho, 6'3", 200 and some odd pound guy, how to saddle his horse. And so if I can do it as a beginner, be willing to be a beginner. Now, look, I'm an accomplished rider. I love horses. I understand them. I enjoy them. But I had to learn to be a beginner. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. I'm just telling you about stepping into a different role is difficult, but somebody's got to do it. And I'm telling you, again, what happens if you make a mistake? Might you be embarrassed? Who cares? No one's going to die.
All right, so affecting change are individuals you call change agents. So let's make everybody listening here have the opportunity to be change agents. Define a change agent and their responsibility in a business environment.
Well, it's getting back to a couple of different things. We're going to want people who are problem seekers and problem solvers. I don't want just people who are seeking problems. I want people who are solving problems. I want people who are going to go out and be a cheerleader. That's what agents of change also do. And agents of change also make sure that they span silos, that they're going across the organizations and don't say, hey, this is my job. That's not in my department. They don't care. Where they see problems, they go out and find solutions for them and help to get them solved, regardless. That's what leaders do. That's what agents of change do. And that's what leaders in the business are looking for in agents of change.
So the saying goes, adapt or die. So in adapting, you talk about entertaining a contrarian voice. Talk to us more about that.
Well, in this case, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be negative in the way in which you want, but you want to be able to bring those people into the fold. So in two ways. One, you want to take on a contrarian voice in terms of your people, and when they're coming to you and say, this is the way we're doing it, you want to be able to say, well, why? How come? Why do we always do it this way? Why can't we do it in a different way? And not to be in a negative way, but to push them. In sports, Darren, we always have a saying of no pain, no gain. So why don't we have a little of that in business? And so what I talk about is creating tension. And so in this contrarian voice, you want to be able to push forward and create tension in the business, because when you create tension, you tend to get something better than you had before. So that's another great way. And the other piece on the contrarian voice is I also want to make sure I'm bringing in those contrarian voices, get the negatives in, get the stuff out on the table, talk about the elephants that are out there, bring them up, carve them up, and feed them out to everybody else. But I want to be able to make sure I include those people in the process.
So talk to us about conditions of satisfaction and how they influence change and the kind of change that we want to make in our business.
Well, there's an action cycle for everything that we have to do. And I mentioned before about conditions of satisfaction. So it's a great question. Let me talk about a little bit more about a customer performer. And there's 4 steps to that. First of all, there's the offer, and that the customer says, I need this. Then there's the acceptance of that offer by the performer. And then from that, from the performer then actually does the work and then delivers it, the 4th piece of it. So that's that action cycle if you take it all the way around. And by the way, there's lots of conditions of satisfaction that might go along with a promise to drive sales. There could be hundreds or thousands of conditions of satisfactions or action cycles that make up that. But it's really getting back to the promises. What are the promises that you're going to drive? And that's what conditions of satisfaction are.
So explain the best way for us to determine our conditions of satisfaction then.
Well, it's both of us sitting across from that table to determine what we're driving. So mutually coming to some kind of mutual conditions of satisfaction. So we're sitting down and going through what is it we're ultimately trying to drive in the business. So when I worked at a major Fortune 100 company, I would sit down with a CEO and chairman and say, what are his promises? Our team, the executive team, would make those lists of 5 or 6 promises. Now, inside of those 5 or 6 promises, somebody in the CFO's team would own that. The chief operating officer would own another one. The chief legal team might own another one. And certainly in marketing, as a chief marketing officer, I would own one of those promises. Now, in that one promise might have been 5 promises that I'm going to be driving to make up that one promise for the company. Then I would go back to my team members and the people, 5 or 6 people that report to me. They would have promises that lead to the summaries of the 5 promises that I own to the CEO. So you can kind of see how it cascades on down all the way through the organization. So all the way down to the janitor, all the way down to the lowest forms of the organization, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And I actually call that process in the book called FAST, and I talk about that. And I've done SOAR, I've done FAST, but focus, accountability, simplicity, and trust. And how do you drive some kind of theme through the business as well? And in fact, at Kodak, when we talked about this, I said, even if we screw up, we're just going to do it faster.
Yeah, exactly. So let's draw from a tangible example in order to get a better sense of this idea of change. Give us an example of when you were working with a company and you implemented change, but it didn't quite work out how you wanted it to, and what went wrong?
Well, that happens every day. I mean, I could give you 1,000 different examples of how that goes every single day. I don't think you can sit there and prescribe from the beginning that you're going to know what the end game's going to be, because there's so many variables that go along the way. But there's so many times that I have stepped into businesses where I've started with one thing in mind, only to find myself taking a different path later on. So I'm treating it a little bit more esoteric than giving you a real life example, because what I want to do is make sure that the listener hears that you don't know where it's going to go. You just know you're going to go somewhere. So it's like starting out on a trip, and I might have mapped it all the way out, but all of a sudden I find that I want to stop in Independence, Missouri because I find this museum a lot more exciting than where I'm going to go, so I'm going to stay here for an extra day or two, or stay here for an extra hour or two. And I think that's what businesses have to be able to be willing to do. Again, getting back to that phrase, adapt or die. So being willing to say that as part of my philosophy, part of the way in which I run my business, I'm willing to do some of that changing, and I might change it and go somewhere different. So you're going to step into that every single day.
So last question for you today, Jeff. Instead of just wondering if we are change agents, give us 2 things we can do today to start becoming a change agent for our business.
Well, the first of all is go in with the right kind of mood. So you're going to be the cheerleader inside that business.